Resilient infrastructure is critical for people's well-being, quality of life, and economic prospects, irrespective of where they live. Inadequate and poorly built infrastructure blocks economic and social development. Increasing exposure to earthquakes, floods, and tropical cyclones stresses infrastructure systems. 2/3 of total economic losses in disasters are associated with infrastructure damage. As extreme weather events become more frequent and intense due to climate change, these losses are set to rise. The impact on small island developing nations and least developed countries is particularly severe. Disaster and climate resilient infrastructure is essential to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and to accelerate climate action. $94 trillion of global investment is needed to fill the infrastructure deficit by 2040. More infrastructure will be built in the next 20 years than in the last 200 years. Fortunately, achieving disaster and climate resilient infrastructure is not expensive. $1 invested in strengthened resilience generates $4 in avoided economic and social losses. The Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure is an international partnership that will support countries to build the disaster and climate resilient infrastructure they need. Championed by global leaders, CDRI will provide knowledge, technical support, and capacity development to those countries with the greatest infrastructure challenges. Join us to achieve the SDGs and accelerate climate action by making all new infrastructure disaster and climate resilient.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I would like to warmly welcome you to the 4th edition of the annual event of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. I'm Kamal Kishore. I'm a member of India's National Disaster Management Authority. I'm also the India co-chair of the Executive Committee of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI. I'm honored today to be joined by Veena Reddy. Veena Reddy is USAID Mission Director based here in India. Veena has worked on development issues across the world in a wide range of countries, from Haiti to Cambodia to Pakistan, and in a number of regions, Central Asia, Central America, and she has really steered innovative approaches to building disaster and climate resilience of some of the most vulnerable communities through livelihood programs, through governance, strengthened governance at the local level, through environmental sustainability program. She is also the United States co-chair of the Executive Committee of the CDRI. So I'm quite looking forward to working with you, Veena. A very warm welcome. Today's event is being hosted by CDRI, co-organized by CDRI and the United States government. US government has been a founder or founding member of CDRI. And in March, after a very successful 2 years of leadership by UK, they took over as the next co-chair. And we are quite looking forward to working with them in taking this initiative forward. This event, this year's the ICDRI 2022, is being held in a hybrid format, anchored here in Delhi. A number of us are here physically in Delhi, and from more than 100 countries, nearly 1,000 participants are engaging in the conversation we are having today. In addition to the main conference, we also have a parallel event through the platform, which is a resilient infrastructure marketplace, which is essentially an online site which does some sort of a matchmaking between people who've been innovating in this space on technological side, on policy side, on process side, and people who are looking for solutions for building disaster and climate resilient infrastructure. So I would really welcome all our delegates, all the participants in the conference to engage with the marketplace as well as the conference as well. Veena, over to you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I am truly privileged and delighted to join you here today in moderating this morning's inaugural session here at the International Conference for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. The United States is honored and excited to be this term's co-chair alongside India and to really build upon the great work done by the United Kingdom and India during the last term. The theme of this year's conference, envisioning a people-centered and resilient infrastructure transition, really resonates with the United States government and our priorities and commitments as we seek to meet the challenges of our times in collaboration with other nations, and to do so in a way that really emphasizes inclusion and accessibility. As President Biden has stated, when we invest in climate resilience and infrastructure, we create opportunities for everyone. During this conference, I'm looking forward to learning more about how a people-centered approach like this can address a multitude of needs, including those of the most vulnerable among us. So this is my first ICDRI conference, and I am very lucky to have a guide as knowledgeable as Kamal to guide me with his decades of experience and leadership on these important issues. I'm also looking forward to hearing from leaders, decision makers, practitioners, and researchers from across the globe this week as we come together to discuss and hopefully challenge each other a little bit as we seek solutions through collaboration and as I come from a development agency to galvanize concrete actions. With that, it is my honor to kick off the conference with a very special video message from His Excellency, Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. He has been a passionate leader, champion, and advocate for CDRI's mandate.
Excellencies, experts, academics, business leaders, policymakers, and my dear friends from across the world. Namaskar. I'm delighted to join you at the 4th edition of the International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. At the outset, we must remind ourselves that the solemn promise of the Sustainable Development Goals is to leave no one behind. That is why we remain committed to meeting the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable by building the next generation infrastructure to realize their aspirations. And infrastructure is not just about creating capital assets and generating long-term return on investment. It is not about the numbers. It is not about the money. It is about people. It is about providing them highly quality, dependable, and sustainable services in an equitable manner. People must be at the heart of any infrastructure growth story. And that is exactly what we in India are trying to do. As we scale up the provision of fundamental services in India, from education to health, from drinking water to sanitation, from electricity to transport, and much more, we are also tackling climate change in a very direct way. That is why at COP26, we have committed to attain net zero by 2070 in parallel with our developmental efforts. Friends, the development of infrastructure can unleash human potential in remarkable ways, but we must not take our infrastructure for granted. These systems have known and unknown challenges, including climate change. When we launched the CDRI in 2019, it was based on our own experience and felt needs. When a bridge gets washed away in floods, when a power line is broken by cyclonic winds, when a communication tower is damaged by forest fires, it disrupts the lives and livelihood of thousands of people directly. The consequences of such infrastructure damage can last for years and affect millions of people. So, the challenge before us is quite clear. With modern technology and knowledge at our disposal, can we create resilient infrastructure that is built to last? Recognition of this challenge underpins the creation of the CDRI, the fact that this coalition has expanded and received wide support from across the world indicates that this is our shared concern. Friends, in the short time of 2.5 years, the CDRI has taken important initiatives and made valuable contributions. The initiatives on infrastructure for resilient island states that was launched at COP26 last year is a clear expression of our commitment to work with small island countries. CDRI's work on strengthening the resilience of power system has already benefited communities in coastal India by reducing the duration of power disruption during cyclones. As this work progresses to the next phase, it can be scaled up to benefit over 130 million people who are exposed to tropical cyclones every year. CDRI's work on resilient airports is studying 150 airports around the world. It has the potential to contribute to the resilience of global connectivity. The global assessment of disaster resilience of infrastructure system that is being led by CDRI will help create global knowledge that would be immensely valuable. CDRI fellows from across the member states are already producing solutions that can be scaled up. They are also creating a global network of committed professionals that will help shape a resilient future to our infrastructure systems. Friends, to make our future resilient, we have to work towards a resilient infrastructure transition, which is the primary focus of this conference. Resilient infrastructure can also be the centerpiece of our wider adoption efforts. If we make infrastructure resilient, we prevent disasters not only for ourselves, but for many future generations. It is a shared dream, a shared vision that we can and we must translate into reality. Before I conclude, I would like to congratulate the CDRI and the United States government for co-hosting this conference. I also wish to extend my best wishes to all partners who have co-created this event. I wish you all fruitful deliberations and productive discussions. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your vision, your motivating words, and for India's leadership on these important challenges. India's commitment to leave no one behind and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, the poorest of our population is really inspiring for us all, as is the concept that this will also unleash human potential. ICDRI began to share India's experiences and expertise with the world, and then to convene countries to collaborate on these solutions as we look for resilient, sustainable means of advancing our goals, including for small island states and others that are most vulnerable to climate change and other disasters. And we look forward to your continued leadership, vision, and support in realizing the mandate of ICDRI. Thank you.
Thank you, Veena. The Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned the initiative called Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. This was launched initially at the encouragement of UK, but has received much wider support. We launched it in COP26 in Glasgow, and it has been supported by, of course, the SIDS themselves, the United Kingdom, Australia, US, Japan. Very recently, the European Union has announced support for it. And in this whole effort, Australia has been a key champion of the cause of small island states. But Australia is not just a champion of small island states, but also looking at resilience more broadly across the world. Later this year, in September in Brisbane, Australia will be hosting the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. After a gap of 4 years because of the pandemic, it couldn't be held in 2020. The previous one was in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, also a CDRI member country. So from 2018, now in 2022, we will have a conversation on this issue in Brisbane. And I'm very interested, very eager to hear what the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison, has to say. I invite you to hear his address.
Prime Minister Modi and distinguished guests, I'm delighted to be with you for this conference. Australia is the only nation on earth with a continent all to itself. And since time immemorial, the peoples of our continent have contended with this resilient but beautiful land. Drought, fire, cyclones, floods, these are things we know. And we know that because of climate change, the frequency of such events is increasing here and across the region. And small island states, especially our Pacific family, are particularly vulnerable. That's why I joined with Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister Johnson, Prime Minister Bainimarama and the Prime Ministers of Jamaica and Mauritius to launch the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States Initiative, or IRIS, at COP26 last year. Australia has pledged $10 million for this, which complements our broader work with our Pacific family. Work such as the $3 billion Australian Infrastructure Facility for the Pacific. Here we work with our Pacific family nation governments to build infrastructure that is climate resilient, such as roads and ports and buildings. For decades, our climate and ocean support program in the Pacific has been assisting our neighbours predict and in turn prepare for extreme weather events and tide fluctuations. Elsewhere in the region, our Partnerships for Infrastructure initiative is helping to promote disaster resilient infrastructure. And Australia is part of global efforts to reduce emissions and achieve net zero by 2050. Australia is proud to partner with India in meeting the challenges of disaster resilience and recovery. And as I speak, India is preparing another 9 tonnes of essential supplies for Tonga, still recovering from January's tsunami, which the Royal Australian Air Force will help deliver. And through the Quad of Australia, India, the United States and Japan, we are exploring opportunities for sharing satellite data to monitor climate change and support disaster response and preparedness in the Indo-Pacific. Whether in Fiji, Maldives, Sri Lanka or Micronesia, we will continue to work together to support our region's resilience and recovery. I commend my dear friend Prime Minister Modi in establishing this coalition, and I'm proud Australia is a founding member. I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I couldn't really agree more with you. The effort of building resilience requires a whole range of actions which you highlighted, from early warning systems, prediction, effective systems of swift recovery, supporting hotspots that get really battered by major events. We saw what happened to Tonga earlier this year. Very inspiring remarks indeed, and I really look forward to having an engagement with Australia which enhances all our collective impact within the framework of CDRI.
Thank you for those great reflections, Kamal. Another great champion of disaster risk reduction has been Japan, and including the first World Conference on Natural Disasters in Yokohama in 1994, the Kobe Conference in 2005, and the Sendai Conference in 2015. We are so honored to have a message from His Excellency Fumio Kishida, Prime Minister of Japan. And Kamal, I invite you to read this message. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a message from His Excellency Mr. Fumio Kishida, Honorable Prime Minister of Japan, to the inaugural session of ICDRI 2022. Quote, "It gives me great pleasure to convey my message on behalf of Japan to the inaugural session of the International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure 2022, or ICDRI 2022, on the year marking the 70th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Japan and India. Natural disasters cause a great loss of life and property. Disasters have a profound effect on the dignity and livelihood of individuals and can obliterate the achievements of long-term development in an instant. Building upon the idea of human security, Japan has always attached particular importance to assisting efforts for disaster risk reduction in developing countries in order to realize a world where no one is left behind in disasters. This is based on Japan's own experience of suffering from countless disasters throughout our history. Against this background, Japan hosted the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in March of 2015, where we were able to incorporate concepts such as mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction, prior investment in disaster risk reduction, and build back better in the international guiding principles of disaster risk reduction adopted at the conference, which is now called the Sendai Framework. Natural disasters such as cyclones, flooding, and droughts are intensifying year by year and have become more frequent due to climate change. Efforts for disaster risk reduction are ever more important also from the viewpoint of adaptation to climate change. Next year marks the halfway point to the target year 2030 of the Sendai Framework, which is aimed at substantially reducing mortality and economic loss, as well as damages to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services by disasters. It is therefore very timely for this year's ICDRI to focus on a people-centered and resilient infrastructure transition. I look forward to the sharing of best practices and the latest knowledge, as well as exchange of views on enhancing collaboration and implementation among the policymakers, practitioners, and experts who take part in this conference from around the world. Japan intends to contribute to the initiative of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, utilizing the knowledge and technologies fostered through our past experiences of disasters, such as earthquakes and typhoons. We also expect CDRI to play a significant role in the Quad's efforts for adaptation to climate change. In this context, I'm delighted to learn that this year's ICDRI will feature a session where experts from the 4 countries, namely Australia, India, Japan, and the United States are expected to exchange their views towards augmentation of disaster resilience and collaboration in the Indo-Pacific region. In conclusion, I wish to express my sincere respect for India's leadership in advancing CDRI, and I hope that ICDRI 2022 will be a significant opportunity to promote a global reduction of fundamental disaster risks. Thank you." Unquote.
Thank you, Prime Minister Kishida, for those inspiring words and for Japan's leadership, especially on building on this idea of human security, which elevates the concept of human dignity, which is so important during the aftermath of any disaster. Japan's leadership on disaster risk reduction is so evident. I believe we'll be hearing a little bit later today from the United Nations on their latest assessment of disaster risk globally, using the framework that was created at the 2015 Sendai Conference. Japan's commitment to mainstream disaster risk reduction, to make advanced investments, and to build back better are heartening to hear about. We look forward to Japan's continued support towards climate and disaster resilient infrastructure across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Veena. CDRI's membership of Africa is gradually increasing, of African nations. Right now, 4 African countries are part of this partnership. And one of the newest members of CDRI is Madagascar. And we are very fortunate to have a message from the Honorable President of Madagascar, His Excellency Andry Nirina Rajoelina. I now invite you to listen to his message.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs d'État et de gouvernement, honorable assistance. C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui, virtuellement, à l'occasion de la cérémonie inaugurale de la 4e conférence internationale sur les infrastructures résilientes aux catastrophes. En quelques années, cette conférence est devenue un espace important de discussion et de délibération sur l'avenir résilient de nos systèmes d'infrastructures. Je tiens à remercier le Premier ministre Modi pour le leadership de l'Inde dans la promotion de la résilience au climat et aux catastrophes par le biais de la coalition pour des infrastructures résilientes aux catastrophes. Nous avons récemment rejoint la ICDRI et sommes honorés de faire partie de ce partenariat mondial. Nous sommes décidés à y apporter notre dynamique participation et à partager avec les autres pays notre expérience sur la gestion des catastrophes liées au climat. D'ailleurs, Madagascar, très faible pollueur, compte parmi les pays les plus vulnérables au changement climatique. Nous sommes aujourd'hui le 4e pays le plus exposé et affecté au monde aux effets du changement climatique. Notre grande île subit à la fois les inondations à répétition à cause des cataclysmes météorologiques et la sécheresse intense causant une famine chronique pour la population du sud de mon pays. En moyenne, 15 cyclones frappent Madagascar chaque décennie. Ces dernières années, les événements climatiques extrêmes ont entraîné principalement la diminution de la production agricole, la destruction des infrastructures, les pertes en vies humaines, la dégradation des ressources naturelles rendant précaire la sécurité alimentaire, ainsi que la santé publique et l'alimentation en eau potable. Une situation qui freine notre élan et ralentit les activités de développement du pays. À cause du changement climatique, les cyclones deviennent de plus en plus fréquents et de plus en plus violents. Cela s'est récemment produit en début de cette année. En l'espace seulement de 25 jours, Madagascar a subi une série d'événements climatiques majeurs. 4 cyclones se sont répandus sur l'île. Il y avait le passage de la tempête tropicale Ana, du cyclone Batsirai, un des cyclones les plus violents de ces 10 dernières années. La tempête tropicale Bumako et le cyclone Emniati. Ces cyclones ont endommagé non seulement plus de 8500 habitations, mais aussi des établissements scolaires, des infrastructures de santé, des bureaux et bâtiments administratifs, et affecté également la vie et les moyens de subsistance des milliers de personnes. La montée des eaux est également à l'origine des dégâts sur les infrastructures routières, ferroviaires, hydro-agricoles et énergétiques, ainsi que sur l'agriculture qui représente la principale activité pour 80% de la population. Madagascar a vu près de 200 000 hectares de terres agricoles ravagées et inondées. Et pourtant, notre objectif est d'augmenter de 100 000 hectares les surfaces rizicoles à Madagascar en vue d'atteindre l'autosuffisance alimentaire. Afin de mettre en œuvre des actions de réponse d'urgence et de reconstruction pour une transformation concrète dans la vie de la population touchée, l'État malagasy a élaboré un plan national de redressement visant à aider les populations sinistrées à travers l'amélioration de l'accès aux services sociaux de base, à relancer les activités génératrices d'emplois, à restaurer et mettre en place une distribution continue d'électricité, réhabiliter les routes et développer des solutions d'habitation suivant les normes de construction de bâtiments paracycloniques. Travailler pour l'adaptation des sociétés rurales aux risques climatiques est l'une des clés pour relever notre défi de développement. Pour Madagascar et tous les pays vulnérables face au changement climatique, il est crucial d'investir dans la résilience des systèmes d'infrastructure. Ils sont non seulement les lignes de vie de notre économie en temps normal, mais aussi essentiels pour une reprise rapide après une catastrophe. Au cours des dernières années, Madagascar a réalisé d'importants progrès dans le renforcement des capacités et des cadres institutionnels afin de gérer les catastrophes de manière proactive et d'améliorer notre résilience climatique. Il est important de partager nos expériences pour faire progresser nos programmes de résilience aux catastrophes et au climat. À cet égard, l'ICDRI 2022 est une importante plateforme d'échange et de connaissances pour renforcer la résilience des systèmes d'infrastructure et encourager la collaboration pour servir les communautés les plus vulnérables du monde. En tant que membre africain le plus récent de la coalition, nous attendons des échanges et des activités fructueuses ayant un impact direct sur la vie des populations. Nous espérons qu'au cours de l'année à venir, des programmes et des projets spécifiques du CDRI seront lancés et qu'ils incluront Madagascar. Madagascar est engagé et déterminé à œuvrer pour notre cause commune de promotion de la résilience des infrastructures aux catastrophes et au changement climatique, non seulement dans notre pays, mais dans le monde entier. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that message. 4 cyclones in 25 days. The whole problem really comes alive when you describe what really were the implications of those 4 cyclones. You highlighted the tensions, the challenge of meeting the development aspirations while also building resilience. You know, you want to increase rice growing areas, but you are getting affected by cyclones more frequently and more intense cyclones occurring. So very inspiring also to hear about the steps that Madagascar is taking towards building resilience. And we're really looking forward to working with Madagascar within the CDRI partnership, learning from what they've been doing, and also hopefully contributing to the efforts within Madagascar. Veena, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we've learned some sobering facts as well as inspiring calls to action from the leaders who spoke today. I'm really excited to learn more from all of the folks gathered here today, including online, as we really collaborate so we can listen, adapt, build new solutions that are truly people-centered and resilient. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the United States, we are thrilled to be co-hosting, co-leading CDRI with India's wonderful vision and leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veena, for joining me for this opening ceremony. And on behalf of the Government of India, I would like to thank you and your government for your leadership, and quite looking forward to our continued collaboration and to taking CDRI to the next level in terms of actually delivering concrete results in our member countries. Now, before we conclude the opening ceremony, I would like to provide a very brief overview of what is in store for the next 3 days for the ICDRI 2022. We have a full 3-day program, 4th, 5th, and 6th of May. If I were to give a very quick structure to how it is organized, the first day is focusing more on regional issues, on policy issues, regional forums and policy forums. Tomorrow we will be focusing sectorially and thematically, and day after tomorrow it will be focused more on finance, standards, how do we make it happen, tools to make resilient disaster and climate resilient infrastructure happen. So that's the broad brush structure of the agenda. Today, right after this, we will have a stage setting session. We will frame the whole conference in that session. We'll have some thinking on how do we deal with uncertainties. We'll look at the needs of countries that need to refurbish infrastructure as well as countries that need to close the infrastructure gap. We will look at issues in the Indo-Pacific. We will look at issues related to risk assessments. And later in the evening, we'll have a very exciting session where we will bring to the conference a whole range of capacities of the US government, from the Department of Energy to transportation, as to how we can bring them to bear for a disaster resilient infrastructure. Tomorrow, there are several thematic sessions on transport, on resilient energy systems, and so on, issues of capacity, issues of nature-based solutions. So tomorrow is focused more on themes and sectors. The day will start with a focus. You heard our leaders talking about IRIS, the Infrastructure for Resilient Island States. The capacity, the facility is being built. So as a part of that, we will have the first session in the morning on IRIS. And day after tomorrow, we will focus on future, looking at resilience of hydrogen systems, looking at financing, and looking at what kind of standards, lexicon, etc. we require for taking this, this agenda forward. And we'll close day after tomorrow. We have an exciting agenda before us. We look forward to your engagement with this process through the platform. Those of you who are here, you will have the opportunity to interact with resource people, speakers who are here in person. And of course, there is a marketplace as well, where you can look at offers of innovation that are actually out there that you can engage with and perhaps deploy in your own work. With that, thank you very much. We close this opening ceremony. We'll meet again in the same studio at 11:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Thank you very much.